I'll do the introductions, and then I'll allow you, Mmabatho, to go first. And then after that, I will take a couple of questions, a few questions, and then Hermien will go next. And then at the end of the session, we'll take questions for both our speakers. Okay, so to start with, the reason why we wanted to have this event is, firstly, it's now almost, we are about to start the 16 days of activism, and this is a good time to discuss. Not that we only discuss these topics during this time of year, it's a topic that is important throughout the year, but given that we are heading towards that time of the year where this is becoming topical, we felt that it's important to also contribute to the conversation and focus this on workplace sexual harassment, as well as how companies can deal with this. So now, with that said, I'm going to introduce our speakers. The person who's going to go first is Mmabatho Phage. She founded MNK Human Capital Solutions in 2002 after spending 22 years in corporates. Her career as an HR practitioner spans over 20 years in diverse industries. She cuts her teeth in HR in the mines as an EAP consultant, then moved to BMW as a recruitment officer. She worked for the following blue chip companies, mostly in generalist roles, she worked for companies such as SAB, Total Energies, SAA, Aveng Manufacturing Duraset, and Iron Mountain. She was leading teams in implementation of the entire value chain of human capital management. Once Mmabatho has spoken, we're going to allow Hermien to speak, and she's the head of sustainability stakeholder engagement at Anglo-American. She has worked for Anglo for approximately 14 years, doing various roles in sustainability reporting systems, data analytics, and strategy. She's currently involved in engagements with civil society, human rights, and gender-based violence. I'm going to also share links to some of the nonprofits that deal with emotional trauma, that help women through who are experiencing gender-based violence or sexual harassment, help them through and manage those processes. So I'll put those in the chat for anybody who feels that they need to access those institutions. They are more than welcome to go and follow the links. The contact details are there, and more information will also be available on those websites. All right, Mmabatho, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be sharing my screen. I have prepared a presentation which will highlight some of the aspects that I'll be covering, and will also allow people to ask questions as we proceed. Feel free to draw my attention by Karabo. Please mention it because I'm going to have a full-blown screen. I may miss out on the hands or comments. Alert me to that, please.
I'll help you.
Okay, thanks. So, ladies, I take that we all are ladies here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you on the subject today. What I'm going to be covering, I'll give the context and focus on what sexual harassment is, identify the role players in the saga, and also speak through the nature and extent of this sexual harassment. Also look at what enables it in the workplace, the impact of sexual harassment in the workplace, the role of the bystanders, and the backlash experienced by the victims, stroke targets. I'll be using the word victim and target interchangeably, and how they can, how the law can be applied to protect and empower them, and also importantly, how to deal with retaliation as one of the main backlash they experience. So in terms of the context, I searched for the latest statistics from a South African perspective. I couldn't find anything that is recent compared to what the UK and the US have. The latest I could find was some statistics from an organization called Urban Stats SA in August 2018. That information is like that, and I thought, it would be too outdated. But what was interesting out of what I saw, without going into the numbers, is that sexual harassment as a phenomenon is not only affecting women in the workplace, men also experience it. And also interestingly, I learned that even the junior employees is not so much only about people in the position of power. It's also junior employees who are perpetrators of sexual harassment. So I also found a report by CCMA that shows that the cases on sexual harassment, they've handled an increasing number of it, and it depends on how we really want to have a look at this. You can celebrate it as a glass half full or a glass half empty, depending on your outlook to life. Firstly, you can say, oh, great stuff. The numbers are increasing. Therefore, it means people are now coming up and reporting it. So unlike in the past, or as we know, people often do not report this for various reasons. But seeing that there's a lot of cases going to system, there's an increase in that, it can only mean that people are now reporting. Oh, the glass half full aspect could say, the numbers are on the increase because the measures that are implemented by organizations and the government are not being effective. So it depends on how we look at it. And the other weakness that we find in our system as a South African environment is that the legislation that is supposed to be dealing with sexual harassment is very fragmented, I find. Like we have Employment Equity Act, for example, will approach sexual harassment as a discrimination issue, unfair discrimination, and the labor relations would approach it in the form of misconduct, and a remedy for the victim would mean that the person must resign and go and claim constructive dismissal and prove that the person resigned because they couldn't stand the nature of the abuse they were experiencing. So very reactionary and also not favoring the victim. The other remedy is common law approach, where one can approach the court and the claim damages. But what I find also with that is that cases can take too long in the courts, and it is costly. Sometimes one loses the stamina and just the appetite to fight it because of lack of resources, or just feeling that emotionally they don't want to continue with this. And because of no uniformity in the approach, it becomes difficult to proactively manage it, like prevent it and manage it. So different organizations have this responsibility to educate people. Hermien will be talking more about what happens in that space, but I'm just highlighting the challenges that are there. And one other aspect about it is that it's very difficult to manage third parties. Third parties would be, for example, the customers or contractors, because workplace sexual harassment speaks to what happens in the work environment. It doesn't matter where it is. It could be at a work function. It could be anything that would happen of a sexual nature that is unwelcome happening in an event that is organized by the organization or the office. And it is also open to abuse, which now brings me to a story that I once experienced in my career, where an employee claimed sexual harassment for advancement of their own interest. So what happened in the case, I'll call the lady Patricia. Patricia was working in one of the substations of this organization that I was working for in the coastal area, and home is here in Johannesburg, and she wanted to move back to Johannesburg. She had applied for a managerial position at that station and worked there for a few months. And when the opportunity, a vacancy arose in Joburg, she applied for the position. So the company policy at the time was that all positions must be advertised and all candidates must apply, because we didn't want a situation. It was a highly unionized environment where people just parachute into positions. So the argument from the unions at the time was that she had been proved competent through the previous interview where she was appointed as a manager at the substation. And what they were ignoring was that the substation was very small compared to the Joburg operations, and therefore the complexity of the role was completely different. So on realizing that we weren't going to budge, she then lodged a sexual harassment claim. Upon investigation, she was happy to share the messages that she was getting from, let's call him Patrick. From Patrick, they were very sexual in nature. Patrick was calling him baby, but she's not showing her responses. So the long and short of it is, upon investigation, we realized that there was just no abuse here. She was just abusing the system that was in place, which really is unfortunate when people do that, because they trivialize this important matter. So if you look at what it is really, it is a form of gender-based violence, and it attacks dignity, and as indicated from a Employment Equity Act point of view, it is a form of unfair discrimination. It includes, but not limited to, victimization, intimidation, they call it quota pro quo harassment. This is where now the person in a position of authority uses his position or her position to buy sexual favors from the victim. Like, you scratch my back, I give you a promotion, I motivate for your race type thing. It becomes very unfavorable, and for others who are not complying with who are not acceding to their request. And then it also is an element of equity and equality to it, in that they are able to block your career progression if you don't give into their sexual advances. So the Code of Good Practice that was first documented in 2005 on sexual harassment, there's been, the codes have been amended, but the sexual harassment aspect of it hasn't been interfered with, because it was just expanding the harassment in the workplace aspect of it to include emotional harassment and all that. But in terms of sexual harassment, the code is very clear, and it also is apologetic in terms of saying these are the tests that it should pass. The two main ones that stood out for me was that it has to be unwelcome. If somebody makes sexual comments and throws sexual compliments at you, and you don't say, no, I do not like it, then it is not harassment. And the person does it once, and then you tell them, no, I'm not comfortable with this, they stop. It's not harassment. It's got to be unwelcome. Even if before you were, even if you were in a relationship with this person in the work environment, at that point when you don't want to continue with it and you feel that I want out, the person still persists, you are able to claim harassment. And then it is based on gender, sexual orientation. It can either be physical, verbal or non-verbal. And now we live in a technology era where even social media and explicit sex tapes are sent to people, or exposures of genitals. It is a form of harassment. We see what happened recently with the speaker of Free State government, where her lover exposed her private moment. It wasn't happening in the workplace, yes, but these are the things that can happen in the workplace, you know. So, and back to the point that it has to be unwelcome. I had another incident where, in this instance, it was the boss, a male boss, and making love propositions to a junior employee, female employee. That is a form of sexual harassment if it persists even after you said no to it. So the lady said, no, I'm not comfortable with this. Please don't do it again. Then it happened the second time, and then the lady went to the office to say, you know, we have a great relationship working. I really like working for you. I'm learning so much. But it gets to a point where I'm even scared to come to the office now because of your behavior. The positive thing to it is that the boss stopped that behavior and continued the relationship on the professional basis. The long and short of it is that 10 years later, they were married. So you see, it can take a whole lot of directions depending on the parties and what is at stake here. If the person says no, you stop, and maybe the circumstances at that point, the junior employee felt it was inappropriate, but with time, after they had both moved away from that organization, they found each other and got married 3-4 kids later now. So who are the typical role players in this phenomena of sexual harassment? There's got to be someone who perpetrates, the one who causes harm, be it a co-worker, be it the boss, be it, and even same-sex people do abuse one another. It's not just a male and female phenomenon. And there's a victim, the one who's the receiver of this, or the target, the person that gets targeted for such abuse, and the bystander. These are the people who are there when these things happen, and whether they see or choose to, they see and do something about it, or see and look the other way, also depends on a whole lot of factors that we will cover in this talk. Are we comfortable? So, or do you have questions, or can I move?
I don't see any hands at the moment, Mmabatho. You can move forward.
Okay. Karabo, okay, there we go. So the role players, as I mentioned earlier, it can be any one of these, owner, employer, contractor, can be either a perpetrator, a target, or a bystander. But I want us to focus on the perpetrator. This one who causes the pain. They often are people in power who have powerful positions, and they are influenced by a belief that by virtue of their position, they are entitled to certain rights over the people that they are targeting. They sometimes are very narcissistic, and they lack self-control and self-regulation. When they see something, they look at the person, they feel that they're attracted to them because they feel entitled. They'll just act on it without self-control or regulating their emotions. Sometimes it's people that have been abused themselves, and they are just playing it out. Others are attention seekers. This is just but some of the characteristics of those who do who sexually harass people in the work environment. So how it manifests, and it depends on the level of sophistication of the abuser. It can be very subtle, or it can be like quite direct, like a person can literally grab another person or even rape them in the work setup. So sometimes it's subtle, it's innuendos that you don't easily pick up, and it becomes difficult for the victim to even notice that they are being sexually harassed here. So the nature of the conduct can be anything physical or exposure of genitals. I've spoken to that earlier, or sharing the videos, or making comments, like throwing those compliments about one's physical appearance, the body shape, the clothing. And it's a fine line between the harassment itself and it's a very fine line between a compliment and harassment. So it's important that employees are empowered and educated on what to look out for, so they know that they are being sexually harassed here. Like, it's all about really creating an environment where everyone is respected, the employer, the employee, dignity and privacy are respected. If at a sexual level none of this is happening, it is sexual harassment. And looking at what enables it, for it to thrive, the main characters would be the people involved. So, but it is just not about interpersonal relations. Mkhabela is a lady who wrote a book on harassment in the workplace in general. And then she looks at bullying in the workplace, and sexual harassment is also a form of bullying, by the way, from an ecological point of view, where he looks at the things that sustain it in the organization. So at the micro systematic level, it's just the two people involved or the parties involved in the act of harassment, the perpetrator and the victim. And then you have your bystanders as a measure system. They can be bystanders and they can also be perpetrators and they can be victims. These are now the manager, the supervisor, the colleagues, customers, people that you get to interact with in the work environment. Most importantly is the organizational culture, where the organization and how it deals with sexual harassment, the level of tolerance from the leadership top up will determine what happens in the environment, whether the people are open to report it when it happens, or they just stay in their little corner and feel sorry for themselves because the environment, the organization is not communicating and showing zero tolerance to the phenomenon. For example, in a masculine environment, colleagues here, you are in mining environment, you know how it's like, it's majority men, and the young graduates are coming in, they are taking advantage of when they go underground. It really is an environment that exposes women in particular and gays to abuse. So how the organization deals with it, the policies they have in place will determine how well it gets managed and or mismanaged. And then at the micro systematic level, it is influenced by the society we live in. South Africa is a very patriotic country, and the society, then it's further broken down into different racial groups, and then down to tribal groups, where in some women are objectified to be there just to pleasure men. Like the patriarchy it also influences how those who adjudicate on the matter, if it comes to their attention, how they make the environment bully-free, is really dependent on the upbringing and the outlook of the leaders, and how far they unlearn some of the the belief system that they came growing up with, that women are there to just pleasure men. And then you see also with sometimes when you in meetings with males and there's only one female employee, they'll assume that she'll be the one who organizes tea and biscuits for the meeting, you know. So such behaviors, it will start small, eventually it grows bigger into a sexual nature. Then it has negative impacts for all those involved. Like it said, forgetting is difficult, but remembering is worse. This is mostly now applicable for the victim and the bystanders. These two people, they suffer similar consequences or impact of harassment in that, say for the victim, they may feel like psychologically and emotionally they'll be stressed out, they would hate coming to work. Like in the example that I made earlier, they would be in constant fear, they will be feeling the shame, sometimes they blame themselves. And the bystanders, for them, it's even double whammy, because they feel sorry for the victim, and at the same time, they are scared of the perpetrator. So they don't know how to, often they don't know how to handle this, but we'll go deeper into how they can handle it and what organizations at high level can do to empower them. They also don't want to risk their own careers by speaking up, so they would choose to look the other way. They would see it happening, they feel sorry for the victim, but they feel disempowered to do much about it. And then obviously, all these will have a negative impact on the organization. Bottom line, there will be loss of productivity because people are being absent because they now have psychosomatic issues that they present, psychological issues presenting physically, headache, tummy ache there, they stay away from work. Then people start to leave the organization, you lose talent, and then there's team conflict, especially if there's a perception that the target, the victim, is cooperating to these sexual advances. It could be seen as, yeah, because they are favored sexually, that is why. And sometimes it is perception, sometimes it is true. You know, people would make comments like, this one is climbing a career ladder holding her panties, you know. So it becomes also a branding issue for the business, because if it is poorly managed and I leave, and then I go to CCMA and claim sexual harassment and I succeed, and constructive dismissal and I succeed, it becomes case law. So when talent is looking for work, company B says, we're interested in you, they look at, this company is poor at handling sexual harassment issues, I don't want to go and expose myself. So it is denting at all levels here. So back to the bystanders, there's a phenomenon called bystander apathy, where like they would be ignorant, they wouldn't know that what they see happening in front of them is abuse, because they think it's normal for people to throw, for example, compliments that are sexual in nature. Things like, hey, you are so fit, hey, you really are working out hard at the gym. Yeah. And they wouldn't be aware, it's really ignorance, that is sexual harassment. When they see it happening, they think it's normal for men or women or senior employees to compliment the junior ones. And the perpetrators, sometimes they manipulate the bystanders, especially in the meso system, where they pick on their target and manipulate those around them to create an impression that, for example, they are in a relationship, you know, and they also have a way of silencing the victim. So when that happens, the bystanders become ignorant of the fact that now this is sexual harassment at play. There's also an element of fear, of retaliation, or being victimized themselves. Or they don't believe that the company's complaint system, like the grievance procedure or disciplinary process or the policy, is good enough to protect them if they were to whistleblow. And they sometimes it's complacency where they form allies with the perpetrator depending on how powerful they are. They want to be in their corner. They join in the boys' club, so they form alliances with the perpetrator and even protect them. Even if the case was to go for a hearing, they do not want to come in as witnesses. So for the victim, why they sometimes do not report, they are afraid of the backlash that may come with it. Backlash becomes very important in the culture of harassment because the victims often are very fearful of not being believed. That is why they wouldn't report, because often it happens when there are no witnesses. The harassment happens when there are no witnesses, so it becomes difficult for you to report and be believed, and the onus of proof becomes very challenging. If the reporting mechanisms in place at the organization are not effective, or they've seen when the other people previously would have complained how it was handled, the miscarriage of previous cases would discourage people to come forward with it. The other people blame the victim, for example, instead of blaming the perpetrator, would hear comments like, what do you expect really? How do you come to work with such a revealing top, you know? What do you expect? Why did you go for drinks with the guy? What do you expect? Why did you go to his house? Sometimes the lady say, drop this off at my house, before you know it, you are finding yourself in an environment that is making you vulnerable. Oh, he's a nice guy. You wouldn't do, like, the disbelief is the main thing that makes people not to report, and fear of retaliation. Retaliation is when the perpetrator, when they get reported, they come back and start victimizing you. They say things like, "You are not performing suddenly. You were a star performer a quarter ago, but now that you've reported their behavior, you become the problem." And organizations sometimes they hear the voices of those who have power. The powerless would come, you'd be seen as a problem employee. We've seen it happen in organizations where a person that reports is, this one, it's the very one who was having a relationship with so and so, like your reputation precedes you instead of dealing with the real issue at hand. And how then do they handle it when they are faced with such a backlash? They sometimes would avoid, they take a passive approach, they avoid the person, they do nothing about it, they just retreat and focus on their work and start looking for the next opportunity to exit, to look for another job elsewhere. And when they are assertive, they go for it. They'd have to familiarize themselves with the policies. They'd have to confirm that indeed this is sexual harassment to avoid the false alarm. remember the story about this couple, this manager who was genuinely interested in the junior employee, sexually attracted to her, really wanted a relationship with her. The junior employee read it as sexual harassment and said, no, I don't like it. I don't like this attention. At the time, she didn't like it. Eventually, when they were away, then had she gone and reported it as sexual harassment, they wouldn't be together. It would have been difficult to prove, because you would have said, I was interested in her, to have a relationship with her. It wasn't intended to harass. When approached to say I should stop, I stopped immediately, and the relationship continued at the professional level. And if, like I say, the person must really communicate their discomfort with the perpetrator. And if the behavior doesn't stop, then take it to your HR. And because it can be a very debilitating aspect and very traumatic, it is important for organizations also to create emotional intelligence in the work environment, so that when victims and bystanders experience these emotions that come with sexual harassment, they are able they know the feeling. When it doesn't sit well with you, know that it is not right. Therefore, something has to be done about it. So having that emotional intelligence, you're able to name your emotion, you're able to do something about it. So there's no confusion, there's no, and even for those who have the ability to gaslight, because some perpetrators, they gaslight, you say you sexually harassing, they make you manipulate the situation and make you look like you are making up stories here. So the aggressive approach to this is also to be prepared for the retaliation from the perpetrator. So it becomes important for the person who a potential target or even a target to document every incident as it happens, and also document the treatment post the complaint. Like I would make the example that I made earlier, to say you'd be a star performer, all going well, you're happy, flying in your job, and after sexual harassment, you report, and then suddenly those in power, sometimes it's not the perpetrator, but it's friends, because these people have allies. Then they start mistreating you, and they start even questioning your capability and your output. So, but with all said, it's not all lost and doom and gloom. The people have got over and above the three legislative framework that I presented. There's more legal avenues that victims can pursue. The resolution 190 of the International Labour Organization, like South Africa is part of the countries that subscribe to that. They are insisting that countries must have workplace laws that prevent and effectively deal with sexual harassment. Yes, South Africa still has a long way to go in that aspect. The first one is the Constitution, which is the cornerstone of all our laws. It's all about dignity and equality, and occupational health and safety. Employers are required to provide and maintain safe work environments. So these are the avenues. So it's important that employees, before it even happens, as a preventative measure, are educated and skilled in this aspect. Your skills development act says people must be trained. So training programs on sexual harassment can be included. I've spoken about employment equity and the code of good practice which are a guide to organizations on how to have the environment harassment and bully free. So that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. I like this these two quotes that I picked up from the internet. The one says, it is not constant if it makes me afraid to say no. That power dynamics that I mentioned earlier, to say sometimes people just stay in their corner. They are scared to say, hey, I'm not happy with your behavior, and they just like a sheep going to the abattoir. They just give themselves in. And there's another one that I also like that says, we do not want to use the term harassment. What is happening today is sexual terrorism, which indeed is, if you look at just what we are experiencing. And it looks like sometimes these perpetrators, they would target, be it in the work environment and even in general in society, during this period when we are launching, when we are going into these 16 days of activism. That's when we get to hear of all these gruesome things that happen to women. We read about them, it will be all over the news. It's like they'll be waiting for it. So it becomes important really to have the spotlight on GBV throughout the year, through every day. It must be a way of life, not only for us to focus on it during this period. Thank you for your time. Before I take questions, I'll just show you what we do at MNK, but it's mostly HR related stuff. We partner with organizations. It's all about creating workplace harmony. These are the services we offer. There are my contact details if you want to make an inquiry. I see Mudo is as the hands up. Go for it, Mudo.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I must say it was very, very insightful. I actually have two questions. So the first one is, how do organizations like Women in Mining SA support victims whereby the companies are not supporting them? Is there any form of support that you can offer to victims? And then I don't know if I should move over to the second question or you want to answer first.
You can give me the second one as well.
So the second one, actually, I just need clarity. I have a case pending at work where the head of our department actually sent me a video of male genitals, very much explicit and very much sexual. So first, it was the first time this actually happened. So I don't know, would you regard that as sexual harassment or not?
It is, but before reporting it, I would say like it's got to be unwelcome. If you haven't explicitly said to him, I don't like it when you send me this. He may assume that you are happy with it, so it will not be defined as sexual harassment. But having said that, it also depends on your company's IT policy, because the IT policy could be saying it is inappropriate to send this type of messages to using the company assets. The other element to it is what your disciplinary code says. In other organizations, they say if you do it once, then it is, you know. But without those in the organization being as explicit, it is not until you've said no. And then on how the organization like WiMSA would help. Karabo mentioned something that she's going to be posting the links of organizations that can support. Yeah?
That's correct.
Karabo?
Yeah.
Okay, that partner with WiMSA in supporting working on this. Sandra.
Sorry, just to clarify, Mmabatho, we don't partner with those organizations. Those are NPOs that are out there that can help people in such situations. As WiMSA, we do not have any facilities or capabilities to help people going through. All we can do is just guide you to the right places where you can get the right help.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Karabo. Sandra? I see Sandra's hand is up.
Sandra, you can speak.
Is she muted, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so.
How do I can't unmute.
I've just asked her to unmute.
There we go. Sandra. Maybe she forgot to drop the hand.
Sandra, if you can't unmute, you can type your question in the chat.
Hello.
Yes, Sandra.
How are you guys?
And you?
I'm good, man. Sorry to be late. Hey, the load shedding thing issue. Yeah, but then my concern, Mmabatho, is the fact that we have mega companies that hasn't got a HR structure which is sort of active, or which has got maybe less than 3 people, you know, or a maximum of 3 people. So in those kind of organizations, you find that it is really difficult for maybe the victim to sort of relate to anybody in terms of sexual harassment also. Then the other thing that I also liked with your presentation is the fact that you know, in terms of the major or the big companies also, people always suffer from you know, like as you say, friends to perpetrators, and you find that most of the people, they just keep quiet because whatever they have to report is basically an internal thing. So I am looking at your organization as it is that you also affiliate, but I don't know if legally, because you know, at companies, they are always having, when you look at the disciplinary procedures or HR procedures, they always note this clause that says that there may not be external or a legal representative when you sit for even like your labor hearing, your inside job dispute or whatever. So I am just concerned again that how do we then approach the system to make sure that the people get fair hearing or fair adjudication in terms of the.
So let me, I hear there's 2-pronged questions there for big organizations and for small organizations with few people. As indicated, sexual harassment, for it to pass the test, it's got to be unwelcome. So the person would have to say, there's 3 of us in the organization, the one person that you could be colleagues, it can be the boss or the counterpart who sexually harasses. But you've got to say, I do not like this, please do not do it. And then if it persists and you can report, or if there's no ways of reporting it, if it is the owner of the company is doing it, you can take them to CCMA and report it as unfair labor practice, to say I'm being victimized here, and the form of victimization is sexual harassment. And then for these organizations, Hermien is going to be covering that, but they often would have those clauses to say, in normal disciplinary hearing internally, often you don't bring in lawyers or external people to represent you, because yes, it's an internal matter. And like I said earlier, you first tell the person, I'm not comfortable with this, and they continue, then you report to HR. HR would then investigate and follow either the disciplinary process or the grievance process, and then the outcome of which, if you're not happy about, you can take to CCMA. Then they will arbitrate on the matter. I don't know if it answers your question, Sandra.
Thank you. I think we will take the last question from Karabo, and then we'll move on to Hermien, and then the rest of the questions we'll take at the end of Hermien's talk. Karabo?
Hi, Mmabatho. Thank you so much for the great presentation. I have two questions, and well, one is not really, it's a question and that you can give us a suggestion to, because what I'm taking from this is there's a lot of basically learning that must be imparted towards the male and female employees of any organization, because I mean, some people, I mean, after your presentation, I've myself told someone that, you know, they look good, they're training, and I mean, I could have offended them, and I was not even aware of that. So I just wanted to ask if you have in any way been part of any organization that was teaching, you know, imparting the learning on the employees about sexual harassment, because I feel like it's a subject that nobody ever discusses. It only heard about when somebody reports, and this is how you often get victims being, you know, treated in a certain way, and you know, these sort of behaviors that you were presenting on that you will see during that time. And yeah, my second question, it's also relating to what the previous lady asked you about. Would you suggest that because the cases are not uniform, I mean, the HRER guys are usually have a set of similar audience when there's a case, there'd be a victim and the person that initiated whatever act, and then maybe there would be the union guys and the ER person and a chairperson. Would you suggest that for every case, maybe even if we're not going outside to bring in somebody, I mean, that would be a cost to the company and all that, they try to look at they could be, I mean, there's other ways in which our companies are offering us mental help, or we've got care ways, and we already have such systems. Would you suggest that whichever the social worker or the psychologist that's working on the mine, you know, be involved? I don't know, because yeah, I mean, one case and the other, they're always different, the stories are always different. So yeah, those are my questions.
Yeah. Okay, Karabo, on the first one, my company actually does offer training on sexual harassment. I partner with people. It depends on the audience. If I can be the one doing it, or my associate would come and do it. And then on the issue of how organizations support, or how people can handle this, sexual harassment is actually a very difficult issue to be managed, and for the victim in particular, and the perpetrators to some extent, because like I mentioned earlier, it is difficult to prove, and and organizations are also about power abuse. If you're very junior, you are new in the organization, this guy has been working there for 20 years or 15 years, they are doing a great job, the company loves them, they wouldn't even want to listen to what you say. So, and going to HR, some HR professionals, not all, they forget their role as employee champions. They would always want to do what is right in the eyes of the employer, like agreeing with anything that the bosses say. They do not become the voice of the employees that they should be often, sometimes, not all. And then you mentioned the use of your EAP programs in the work environment. If you feel constrained from your HR and the environment, the work environment doesn't open itself to it, speak to someone at EAP, and just not EAP, anyone at work also that you trust. Speak to your family. It cannot be something that you keep to yourself. You need to notify someone so that even the day the matter comes to the fore and is supposed to go for a hearing, it could be a fortunate one where whoever we have told at the time is willing to come in and testify to say, yes, it was reported on this. And remember, in the work environment, cases are on the balance of probability. Story, and if you have been to EAP, it can even strengthen your case, because you can say, it affected me so much, so I even went for psychological support, used the company, and also the service provider for EAP, they do report on the cases that they handle. They don't necessarily mention the names of the parties involved, but they'll be able to say, yeah, there's a scourge here. So many cases of sexual harassment have been seen. Then the business, like business leaders, HR and the executive team would look at that and realize that there's the work that needs to be done at the preventative level internally. I don't know if it answers your question, Karabo.
No, it does. Thank you so much. There's a lot of direction.
Yeah, I think Hermien will part the question you're asking. Hermien is going to be able to give a lot more insight to it. Hermien.
Thank you, Mmabatho, for the talk, and very insightful, very educational and practical tips as well. I like that you mentioned that we need to document the events so that we have evidence when we bring a case forward, because sometimes you forget, you might get your facts mixed up. So thank you for that information. Next, you're going to have Hermien speak. Thank you, Hermien. You can share your slides.
Thank you. Mmabatho, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me here this evening, and for the hardcore people that are still on the line. Shout out to a few people I know here, Dr. Tutula, I see you, Rishni, and a few others, and at least two men, Ernest and Lucindiso, who is a colleague of mine. You always have to acknowledge the men in the room. It's absolutely wonderful. Give me one moment and I'm going to share my slides. I need to figure out how to do it on Zoom, because I'm more of a Teams lady myself. Okay, I think that it should be there. I will depend on you to let me know if you can't see it. I'm going to maybe take a little bit of a step back, but before I do, we all need to acknowledge that in a room of 100 people, and we say this to our GMs also, because they've all made a commitment to stand up to violence and bullying and harassment at work. But in every room, there are people who have statistically suffered from sexual abuse and sexual harassment. and that invariably people will feel emotions, or even for the first time realize that something's happened to them. And those emotions need to be validated. And if you're comfortable with it, please seek help, speak to someone you trust, or call one of these numbers. So as I said, excuse me, taking a little bit of a step back, I think it's worth understanding what violence is. And really it is a behavior, an intentional behavior that causes harm to someone else. And that harm could be physical, could be sexual, emotional, economic. And there are just a few of these really that are visible. And that's how Mmabatho said a few times, these things are so difficult to prove because perpetrators know how to hide their behavior. And a lot of it's not visible. Bullying someone is not a visible thing, but it is still violence. But why do we talk about gender-based violence? And we do that because violence is experienced by different people differently. And some people are more vulnerable to violence. It doesn't mean a person who is vulnerable is weak, but because of their circumstances, they are more likely to experience violence. So we talk about gender-based violence because typically there are gender dimensions attached to violence. And very often it's women who are most affected because of gender discrimination. Over so many years, we live in a society that is unequal, not just from a gender point of view, but from many different perspectives. And that is why those two dimensions are really important to consider. I'm sure that you've often heard people talk about intersectionality, and that means that there's just so many more layers to the story, depending on who you are and whether you are generally part of a vulnerable population. So a child would be part of a vulnerable population. So that, I think, is an important context to put to the story. So when we thought about how we approach this issue, we think about the conditions that support violence. This is more on the prevention side. And then the conditions in which gender inequality are allowed to persist, and the systems that allow it, whether it's our laws, our courts, our companies, our homes. There are rules in those environments that either prevent it or don't allow it, or on the other side, continue to perpetuate the cycle of violence. And then on top of that, you've got triggers, you've got stress, you've got substance abuse that can trigger violence. So there's this whole picture that needs to be taken into account. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work Anglo-American's doing, and it's a start. We've been on this journey for a few years now, and it's long, hard, and tough work, and we don't even remotely think that we are where we need to be. But perhaps in sharing some of our experience, there might be an opportunity to learn from each other. We launched our Living with Dignity framework at the end of 2019, and that was on the basis of a number of baseline studies that we conducted to understand the nature of the problem at Anglo-American. The idea was initially to say, well, we've got clearly a problem in our workplace, and this is an area that we are directly responsible for. And I would suggest that there isn't a workplace in this country, maybe not even the world, that doesn't have a problem. And we have a responsibility to address that problem, a moral one, a legal one, an ethical one. But the feedback that I was getting from people saying, yes, we can address the issue at work, but we work at work and we live at home, and in mining, all of those things are so interconnected that you can't really solve a problem if you tackle only one sphere of a person's life. And that's why the Living with Dignity framework looks at gender-based violence in the business, in the workplace, in homes, in schools, and in communities, because all of those things really intersect so significantly. But starting with ourselves, we have a bullying, harassment, and victimization policy that is global, and 96% of Anglo-American employees have completed their training in person on this policy, and there's renewal that you have to do every year online to understand what those things are. Interestingly, to the point that Mmabatho made earlier on, a conversation around consent and whether it's unwanted or wanted behavior. Our policy says that harassment actually can be a one-off incident, and that you don't necessarily need to prove that it was unwanted, because how can you prove that you didn't want to receive a picture of someone's genitals? I mean, you would think that the person would kind of ask first, as opposed to it just sort of happening. So I think our burden of proof maybe is a little bit lower, even if the legal interpretation of it is something else. So as a starting point, we've got this policy, we've got a zero tolerance commitment. So we've said the right things, and we've got some systems in place to help people navigate their way through harm, the complaint. And that's whether you're a victim or you're a perpetrator. The process needs to be clear and fair to absolutely everyone. Secondly, before I go into the domestic violence one, now what we found over the years is that there is a lack of trust in systems. And it's been mentioned already, they often take too long, and across a big business like Anglo-American, they're often inconsistent. What happens in Kumba isn't the same as what happens in Platinum necessarily. The sanctions are inconsistent. And sometimes you know your HR person, and you might think they're wonderful, but for whatever reason, it's an issue that you don't want to take to HR. So what we started doing 2 years ago now is thinking about this concept of an independent hub that could be victim-centric and provide people who want to go that route. You can still go to HR, you can still go to your line manager, but people who want an independent service that takes a victim-centric and consistent approach to helping people who have experienced harassment, bullying and victimization, as well as domestic violence. And my colleague, Lusindiso, who I mentioned earlier on, is one of the case managers in that unit that was actually launched yesterday. Although the team has been actually working, I think at least since March. I'm sure that Lusindiso will correct me. There was people coming in drips and drabs. And I've just been doing absolutely phenomenal work to support the people who have suffered harm directly, and again, in a fair process that gives equal visibility and opportunity to any party involved in that. That model is also being launched in Australia, and we're looking at doing it elsewhere in the business, because this is not just a South African issue, this is a global concern. Okay, our domestic violence slide isn't in here, but what I did want to say is that we've been thinking about a domestic violence support policy for some time, but with COVID, it became very clear that it needed to be accelerated. The amount of harm people were suffering in an closed home environment just escalated. And that policy has a number of things that we can do to support employees. And it has come with a whole bunch of training and shares on how to recognize signs of domestic violence and training for managers on how to support people. The support measures are additional paid time off if there's economic violence, economic support, a safety plan. So if you phone one of our domestic violence risk assessors, they'll help you assess the situation that you're in. If there's immediate harm, immediate potential for harm, someone who can actually go and help you, and even safe houses for people who need to be taken out of a situation with some urgency. But like I said, we are part of a community, and what happens at work is our direct responsibility. But what happens in communities is of equal concern to us, because we are part of those communities. We influence how mining communities have grown over time. And of course, our employees come from those communities. So this is where we focus outside of the fence, as we call it. And these projects inside of the fence and outside of the fence all connect. But starting at number one, it was really important for us to try and work within existing processes. Everyone, Anglo-American, you name it, have initiative overload and so many things that are happening already that it's not always the most sensible thing to kind of go in with a flag and introduce new work. What we decided to do quite consciously is integrate with what's already happening. So a full review of our policies and processes to look for gaps in how we're thinking about gender-based violence, sometimes to identify things that might actually be harmful, and then improve those policies and even look at some of the gaps. So some of the gaps that I spoke about were the bullying, harassment, and victimization and domestic violence policies. But looking outside of the fence, one of the things that we realized we didn't have was a safeguarding policy. And for those who are not familiar with the safeguarding policy, it's quite a common nowadays, quite a common thing for NGOs to have, because a lot of their workers in the field are doing work with vulnerable groups. And when you have someone in a relative position of power and a vulnerable person, that is where the likelihood of abuse is that much greater. And many of us have CSI programs. We've got employees or people, service providers who work within vulnerable contexts within schools. So what are the processes that we have in place to protect those vulnerable people? So that's just one example there. The policy integration is one thing. The next one is the program integration. I'm not going to talk about it now because it's one of the two examples that I'll give you. Our business units all have interventions that they're running with. A lot of them relate to culture change inside the business. So Anglo-American Platinum has a culture and action program, and it speaks to different aspects of culture that they're wanting to look at. So good news culture is one of the things, and GBV and racism are two of the other focus areas. So they're doing really sort of difficult, detailed work on changing the culture. There's an innovation stream, and then also an advocacy stream where we try and use whatever voice we have and leverage we have to advocate for change and support a deeper understanding of GBV. I think we're all moving as a country away from GBV is bad and stop GBV to, okay, let's think about what's causing this. How is it that we can look at some of the root causes and address them on that level, in addition to some of the more immediate response measures that need to be taken. This is just a list of initiatives that we've got on the go, and I won't go into that because I fear I'm testing your patience this time of night. But here's one example. And this is really just a framework that we use to understand the contribution that we can make to response measures outside of the business. So response measures being what happens when someone has been harmed. What is it that they need to, one moment, access healing, access justice, and access an opportunity to gaining their own independence. And there are these sort of interrelated streams that people need in order to get to those three outcomes that we see as what you would need in order to really move through that journey into a positive place. First of all, shelter. Where do you need to be able to go somewhere so that you can feel safe and heal. You need psychosocial support, so immediate counseling, so immediate trauma counseling, but then also ongoing psychosocial support. Often victims of physical violence will need immediate medical care, but then also a forensic medical examination, which is critical often for the court case, and that ultimately then leads to the judgment. And that's the next stream, the legal support and justice stream. Who's going to offer you that legal advice? How's the court case going to run? How do you even navigate knowing what that all will look like if you are an individual who's just suffered that trauma? There's the policing stream. How are victims protected once harm has occurred? How does the investigation process unfold? How effective is all of that? Because of course, you're not going to access a fair judgment if that investigation process isn't right. And it's interrelated. So investigation depends, as I said, heavily on that forensic medical examination. And then finally, livelihoods. And this is often not One moment, please. This is often not put into this Pathways to Care model, but we've included it there because it is one of the ways to remove vulnerability from someone. One of the ways that people can not be dependent, say, on a partner that has abused them. And the reason that we use this model is because you need to think about where it is that you're going to allocate your resources. Everyone's resources are limited. And when you understand how this full model works within an environment, you know where you can put some of your money. So forensic medical examination is one that I often use. We've got a huge shortage of skills in that space. And without that, as I said, often the entire court case falls flat. So if you put your money into investigation, as an example, without the forensic medical exam, that's not going to go as far as it needs to in some cases. And this also allows opportunity for collaboration. And as mining companies, we operate in the same areas, we care about a lot of the same issues, but we don't very often collaborate on tackling the problem from different angles and in a strategic and cohesive way. And I'm not sure if Dr. Balfour is still on the call, but we've been talking through the Minerals Council to do Zilla care centers, which some of you might be familiar with. And as an example, we as a mining industry could partner with an organization like that because they provide psychosocial support, medical services, and legal support through those centers. And once that bit is being looked after, you can then start looking, okay, do people have shelter? What is the policing system looking like in a community? On the prevention side of things, this is another example of one of the pieces we're doing. So when I talk about gender transformative processes, it's really a concept, it's the more modern concept of gender mainstreaming. And essentially it is looking at a problem from a gender perspective. We all experience the world differently depending on who we are and very often depending on our gender. And what I mean by that as an example is if I walk to the shop at night as a woman, I experience fear, and the likelihood of me being harmed is greater and different to the experience, say, of a man walking to the shop. So when you are implementing a sanitation program, are you thinking about those different dynamics for men and for women and for children when you're doing it? Does that mean that you put the toilet closer to a certain part of a rural settlement? What does it in practice mean for a project that you're implementing? But in addition to that, do people, actually, let me take a step back. So that's the concept of gender transformation. It's really just in everything that you do, considering gender dynamics. And what we thought as Anglo-American is that we've got a number of CSI sustainability programs. I've chosen 3 examples here. So we've got a big health program, we've got the SA Schools program, and then we've got a livelihoods program. And through just those 3 programs, we work with a number of service providers. So we've got the Zimele, we've got JET on the education side, we work with the University of Pretoria on health, and so on and so on. We've got thousands of people at the end of the day, or hundreds at least, who work for us in communities and implement programs. So helping them to understand the gendered impacts of their work, we believe will hardwire those programs to prevent harm. But in addition to that, we need to make sure that those individuals understand what is expected of them, what is or isn't okay when working with vulnerable groups. Do we have checks and balances in place, as an example, for people who work in our South African schools program to make sure that they understand what they can and cannot do? And then lastly, when these individuals, Anglo-American or those who work on our behalf, encounter a case of GBV, do they even know what to do? How do you identify it? And when you are confronted with them, who do you refer people to? What do you do as an individual? So this program, through this program, we've developed a curriculum that is designed for those specific service providers to help them through that journey, so that it's almost from that point onwards a little bit plug and play, because it's already integrated into what we do. I am not going to talk much longer, so I know that there are probably lots of questions coming. But as an example, the livelihoods program that we have, which is run through by Zimele, and TechnoServe is a very close partner of ours. We've got hubs in a lot of host communities, and we've got a lot of supplier development programs. So the hub managers will often say to us, when we're doing this kind of training with female entrepreneurs, they are navigating through running their businesses while encountering sexual harassment from whether it's clients or suppliers, or dealing with trauma that they're suffering at home or that they have in their past. And it's preventing the outcomes that we're looking for in capacitating people to run their own businesses, or capacitate themselves from a skills point of view. So, and they ask us, what do we do? And how do we get rid of that stumbling block to people achieving the potential that they know they have and that we know they have? So this program looks at tackling that kind of problem. It's not the only ones, but it is the only one that I'm going to talk about now, because it just gives a flavor of the type of intervention, I suppose, possibilities. And back to you if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Hermien. Any questions from the audience? Karabo, you have your hand up. You can ask a question.
Not a question, just I'm really wowed at the programs that Anglo has in place. I wonder if they are open to sharing someday, you know, with other organizations, because we're really not at this level. So Hermien, are you open?
There is nothing that we have that isn't freely available to absolutely anyone who wants it. This is not a competitive space by any stretch. So please be in touch and we'll share freely.
Thank you so much.
All right, and also partner. When I spoke about that Pathways to Care model earlier on, I really believe that this is a space that we need to be working together on as mining companies. Because if we all tackle a little part of the problem in coordination with each other, I think we can do just so much.
So true. Huh? So true.
We have Yurishani, you have your hand up.
Hi, Hermien. It's Yurishni, just saying hello. We're here with the Vedanta ladies. There's a question from Marie.
Hi there, everybody. My question with regards to victimization and abuse of the women within the community. Let's say, for instance, or well, in an instance where the husband is working for the company, the lady is not working for the company, but the husband is abusing his wife. How are we going to intervene to ensure that the wife and the kids are kept safe? There need to be some sort of aspect that we can have to say, listen, we know about the problem. Say you are the offender, not your wife. So how in your scenarios are you keeping the wife and the children safe from this abuse from our employees? It is a huge, I think not only with us, I think all over it's a huge problem. And I mean, in Aggeneys itself, it is a question of, if you put in a court order against the husband, then the house is on his name because it's a company name, which means the wife actually doesn't have any rights to the house. So again, how do we protect them in a scenario like this? I would like to hear your opinion, please.
Yeah, that is such a good question, and it's something that we are we're grappling with ourselves, because there's so many complexities. You know, you feel tempted to say, if you're harming your wife, we don't want you working here. you know, finish and clear. But that's not how it works, because then say that family is dependent on his salary, who are you disadvantaging? You know what I mean? if that person loses their job. What I will say is that our domestic violence support system applies also to family members of employees. In that case, that individual, that woman, could approach us and say, harm is happening in my house, and we would offer her and her children the same support as we would offer a female employee. The first thing that we would do then is engage the husband in the scenario that you've given and offer perpetrator support. So how, if possible, to help that individual stop the harm that they are doing. But eventually you do need to ask yourself a question as an employer: does that person, if they are capable of such violence within their home environment, present a safety risk to other people in the business? And by keeping that individual on, are we putting other employees at risk? And there are no easy answers to this. I'm sure Lisindiso's got better practical knowledge than me in this case. But at the very least, these are questions that we need to be asking ourselves, and I think on a case-by-case basis, depending on what you're confronted with. But I do think, sorry, as a last sentence on this, I think that we need to get better at perpetrator support, because in one sense, you're not actually solving the problem. Say if you fire a harasser, you are actually transferring the problem to someone else, assuming that they don't stop. He's just going to go and do it somewhere else. Maybe he won't, because he's realized that there are consequences to actions. But I do think that it's a gap for all of us. Mmabatho, I'm really interested to hear your opinion from a more legal point of view.
Yeah, not so much so legal, but it touches on that, and it was going to just make the point now. It goes back to the point I made earlier about the fragmented nature of dealing with sexual harassment. Imagine there's domestic violence happening. I spoke about societal issues. There's domestic violence happening, and the employer cannot involve in a domestic worker because there are no laws that allows that. You can't charge an employee. I can come in as a wife and say he's beating me up, but what would be the charge? What is your disciplinary code covering? You know, so I think through the EAP, because they give information, then that is where the perpetrator support comes into place, because now the wife would come and report the abuse, then the employer's support would be supporting the perpetrator by taking them through programs that would make them deal with this emotion that drive them to perpetrate this form of abuse. Because as I mentioned earlier, these are people who have issues that they transfer and into abuse. So that's the point I wanted to make, really, to say there's going to be, as an employer, you can't do much about the sexual the domestic abuse, because there's no law that will get you to hold this person accountable. The only way out of it is to support them and take them through therapy so they become changed people. Okay.
Thank you, Mmabatho. Are there any more questions from our guests, our audience? Diksha?
Hi, Hermien, Diksha Pillay from De Beers, and thank you so much for the presentation. It's really informative and insightful. Do you think as a corporate, we would get to a point where, like safety, how we report on safety, and it's part of KPIs, and, the metrics regarding bullying, harassment, gender-based violence becomes mandatory to report on, as part of KPIs for us as the leadership, we incorporate that as part of our KPIs. we publicly report these numbers and cases, not in a manner that exposes the victims, but to have a track record and a baseline that we are putting proactive measures in place. Do you think you see that happening for Anglo-American and De Beers anytime soon?
It's tricky, and I use safety as an example because early days of safety, people didn't want to report incidents because your bonus depended on it, and you didn't want to get people in trouble. And it's taken a lot of very difficult cultural work to get us as an industry to a stage where people will freely report safety incidents and not try and hide them. So I think that we need to do a lot more of that cultural work before we outwardly disclose the number of incidents and actions. And also it sounds terrible, but we would want to see an increase in the number of incidents because it shows us that the systems are working. We know right now that things are severely underreported. So success for us in the short term is actually an increase in incidents. So we don't want to discourage people reporting. What I do know is that all of our executives track the number of incidents, anonymous ones, anonymized, and the outcomes. I know Platinum does it, we do it at a group level. I'm pretty sure De Beers does it, I'm not 100% sure though. So we've got executive eyes on this. I would like us to get eventually to a stage where we do disclose the number of incidents and the outcomes. So 110 unsubstantiated, whatever it might be. If you look on the Doctors Without Borders, the MSF website, you'll see that they actually disclose incidents. So they'll say we've got however many tens of thousands of field workers. There have been 600 accusations of exploitation, 30 have been substantiated, and 20 people have been fired, and the other, whatever, got sanctions. And I think that we do need to get to that stage because it also gives people wanting to report some comfort that something will happen, that there's action. So, yeah, my view on the matter.
Okay. We're going to take the last two questions because it's getting late into the night. The first one is from Sandra.
Hi, everybody. I just want to make a comment. And my comment is, as a woman in mining and having been a middle management lady, having to have advocated, I think, a lot of female issues within the workplace, it's my observation that we can't always be the judge, jury, and the referee. Within systems, I think, and it's something we all need to work on, is that when employees start the whistleblowing process, or whether it's starting to raise awareness of irregularity in the workplace, I do believe that those individuals need to immediately go into some sort of a protection program. We all are aware of the impact of bullying, and the irony is of the very employees that we want to protect in communities from domestic violence are often the very people that work in the organizations that are have narcissistic tendencies, and are the very people that when they go home will continue exercising that behavior. So you can imagine for an employee that has actually been brave enough to raise an awareness within the system where there's either errors, be it in safety or whether in personal safety, we cannot leave them in that system to be left to the mercies and devices of the very people or role players that could be implicated or be part of the problem. And I do believe that there should be some sort of an independency of when those complaints come through, and it might not necessarily be via an anonymous system, but there should be a separate body that takes care of these individuals. And I think this is where EAP programs should be actually extended to include, and I know this sounds like a very almost out of the box suggestion, but if you go and read Mandy Wiener's book on whistleblowers and you're going to have a look at the absolute devastation that's caused in these people's lives, you need to put them into an EAP program that caters almost similar to something as a witness protection or a protection program until the facts are validated around that individual, until the facts around the case is validated, and not leave them to arrive at work day after day, month after month, and be absolutely psychologically, emotionally abused, economically abused. And that is my 5 cents, is that can we honestly be the judge, the jury, and the executioner to our own wrongs? And what other things can we put in place to create a sort of an independent view where we can start facilitating these kind of reports? Just bearing in mind that the very same narcissists that we find in our households are the ones in the workplace too. So that's just my 5 cents.
Thank you, Sandra. I couldn't agree with you more. It's one of the things that I think we also really struggle with, because on the one hand, we're saying to people, stand up, have the courage to report. But on the other hand, we know that people suffer victimization. And this is for anything, right? If you speak up to your boss and say, listen, I don't think this is the right course of action, if you raise a safety issue, you're still going to have that fear of being victimized because of what you're saying. So it is, to an extent, a little bit unfair of us to push this kind of report incidents narrative, but then not have the support systems in place to help people, whistleblowers, essentially, as you're saying. At Anglo-American, we've, in the last couple of years, really been pushing psychological safety, but more on the safety kind of sense. So people feeling safe to speak up when something's not right. We're trying to extend that kind of conversation to safety to speak up about anything, not just a physical safety issue, with protections against victimization. And I wouldn't suggest that we're there, but we're incredibly aware of those risks that exist. 2 other things. One is that we're re-looking at our EAP programs across the business, because we recognize that as they are currently, they're not quite fit for purpose. They're quite general. Give you basic financial advice, give you basic counseling, but don't necessarily have the people who can deal with quite complex issues like victimization at work or GBV. And then finally, the independence issue that you're talking about, that's precisely why we launched the hub. Because yes, people are paid by Anglo-American, but they sit outside of the business units, yet they're accessible to absolutely everyone, and they report into an independent ambassador. So it takes the person out of the system that they might not completely trust. Yeah, so that's as far as we've gotten, but I hear you on that front. There's a lot more to do.
And our last question is from Bonso. Bonso?
Hi Karabo, and hi Hermien, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for the conversation. And I think as a society, we should never, ever, ever get tired of talking about this sessions or these topics. And for me, this week already, I've had like 3 separate conversations, one with my senior general manager yesterday. And in that conversation also, what came out, it was myself and other colleagues, what came out was about reporting, when employees report, and what do we do with that reporting? So I know that, from Anglo-American Platinum, by the way, we have had a report that says so many people have been, dismissed in terms of the acts that they've done. So I think that one was sending good messages. I think what we're saying to our general manager is that if we continue with that type of reporting in terms of when a case is reported, what happens to that, so that the victims or the people that are actually experiencing bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, they're able to say, oh, okay, so something really, really happens when you report these cases. So yes, we know that there is a chance of a person being victimized, and we are thankful for the hub for that, Living with Dignity Hub for that. But we should never, ever, ever stop talking about it. I think small conversations in the corridor, the water hole conversation over a cup of coffee, in a taxi to work, commuting to work, as a conversation starter, talking about, what happened to Sonia's son. What do you think? So I think as a society, we have that obligations. We have no option but to talk about it. But just to raise it up in terms of saying what else will assist us in terms of our colleagues and employees that are working for us. How do they going forward is what they see, what the employer does with the cases. It has come out of 3 conversations. One of them with the unions that I converse with weekly. We have a weekly meeting where we sit and talk about what are we going to talk about? What are we going to do? How can we raise the voice? How can we talk to our colleagues? How can we unlearn to relearn? So it has come out on a few occasions to say people don't see what the companies are doing. They think that I reported and that's it. HR strips it on the carpet. But if it's showed there and saying without names, of course, POPIA Act, and respecting the dignity of the perpetrator and also the victim as well. But just to state in terms of the statistics, generally to say this is what happened with this case, the case was reported for bullying, and this is what happened to the person. Yeah, but thank you so much, Hermien. Always good to talk to you here and talk to you as well. Thanks, Karabo, for the good session.
Thank you, Bonso.
Can I just say that I love that feedback though, and it's great to hear from you that that's actually giving people encouragement. Maybe we should try and accelerate that kind of thing a little bit more across the business if we're ready for it. We'll definitely look into it. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. I was just wrapping up. Indeed, Bonso, we should not stop talking about these. The more people are aware, the more they have the information to make decisions that are suitable for them in whatever situation they find themselves in. Our speakers, Hermien and Mmabatho, thank you so much for the time you've set aside to share your knowledge and the work that you're doing. I'm sure, as you've seen from the comments in the chats, the people are appreciative of the information that you shared. They have asked how they can get in contact with you. Hermien, if anybody has further questions or wants to interact further, how can they get in touch with you?
I will put my details in the chat.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And Mmabatho?
We'll do the same. I'll put my details in the chat. And thank you, everyone, for being a lovely audience, and for you, Karabo, for the opportunity. And as it's been said, it cannot be overemphasized that this is a daily matter that we need to be talking about to create that awareness, and not only to about the perpetrators and the victims and the false alarms. I shared with you, Karabo, I thought we'd have the time to play that video, but then language would have been a barrier, where a youngster in a school environment accuses one of rape. And this boy gets terrified of going to prison, but he leaves a very detailed suicide letter, and then he committed suicide. So back to the issue of, as a concept, it's also open to abuse by other people who then make it, they trivializing it and making it difficult for the real victims. And with those few words, thank you so much. I'll write my details on the chat, and really, really appreciate and look forward to interacting with you outside this forum.
Okay, thank you very much. And for those who are looking for this video, it is recorded and it will be shared on our WiMSA YouTube page. Usually once we have the events, they are available on YouTube within the week. So please look out for that on our WiMSA YouTube page. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Karabo. Bye-bye.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.